残酷な天使のように少年よ神話になれ
Evangelion is a legendary show. So legendary it makes writing some sort of introduction for it quite hard, as I fear I'd just be repeating common facts. I do not mean to cover Evangelion, there are a million videos doing that, but instead the breadth of adaptations left in its wake. Considering how big of a media franchise it is, the amount of Evangelion games is to be expected, but few ever really talk about them, and most of them aren't even available in English even through fan translations, let alone official ones, despite how prolific the series is. So with you today, I'd like to dip my toes into the pool of Eva and see what can be found. Firstly, we're going to start with Girlfriend of Steel 2, a visual novel on PSP, which thanks to dedicated fans does have an English translation available online. It's a visual novel dating sim, based on the small segment in episode 26 where we see an alternate life for Shinji. Asuka's now a childhood friend, Misato is their teacher, Rei is this new transfer student with a pretty different personality. However, all these bizarre tweaks have been made on top of that. Firstly, Kaoru is there, as a friend to Shinji, and is incredibly flirty with him. But bigger than that, the angels still exist. There are still Eva pilots. But it asks you to just kind of not think about that, despite Eva 1 being in the same game as Shinji's alive mother. But I really love that about the game, to be honest. I played through it with a couple friends who were also big Eva fans like me, and we kept losing our shit as crazier and crazier things happened. As I mentioned before, it's focused on romance, so it has dating sim elements. But it's a little limited mechanically. Really all you can do is go to different places and talk to people. That's about it. You choose who you want to date with these obvious who would you like to do this thing with, or whose side do you pick dialogue choices, and that's all the game has to offer. Which I honestly don't mind very much. It's also very short, allowing you to kind of blast through it incredibly quick. There are a number of bad ends that usually end up being pretty funny. I distinctly remember one where Shinji and his father make up and go live out in the countryside together. But back to the romance, there are two main options with a bizarre pseudo-third route. Obviously you can either romance Rei or Asuka, with a different ending for each. However, for a majority of the game, instead of spending time with them or choosing them in dialogue options, you can also romance Kaoru. This is awesome, and personally I find it to be by far the best option, but oddly enough he doesn't get an ending. This will be spoilers, but it's obviously a silly Eva visual novel, so I don't know, take that as you will. At the end, there is a massive fight, as nearly all the angels attack at once. Everyone gets into Evas and stops them. As you celebrate after the fact, Kaoru leaves from the table pretty nonchalantly and is never seen again. You are then forced to pick between Rei or Asuka. Honestly, it's pretty disappointing, but it feels like such a weird and rushed thing that most likely there was a Kaoru ending, but they couldn't make it happen. Most likely from somewhere in the process being blocked from showing a happy gay couple, oh no. But the lack of an ending doesn't detract from the great moments along his route. Him teaching Shinji how to play piano, these rose petal backgrounds they give him sometimes, him practicing his makeup skills on Shinji, it's all very funny and very cute. It honestly feels like some sort of otome type thing for a female audience, but they just forget Shinji as a boy, and I'm here for it. But the biggest moment, that was a real shocker, is during a specific scene with an elevator, where only two people can go in at once, and you pick who you go with. If you pick Kaoru, Kaoru and Shinji kiss. He calls it proof of his friendship, which is such a hilariously weak attempt to pretend this is straight in any way, shape, or form. If you don't feel like playing the game but would like to see some of the Kaoru stuff, there's a video on YouTube that's about an hour long and is just his route. So I'd recommend watching that, and just skipping around the video for anything that looks interesting. But overall, it is a cool title. It just feels so divorced from the original show. Not only is it entirely based on a small 3-minute segment from the last episode, it even adjusts that ending to be stranger. It's a weird experience. I would recommend you play it with friends or something like that, like I did. I'm not sure what my experience would be if I didn't have other people to react to the absurdity with, especially as we cheered on Shinji and Kaoru. But even just in its own right, it's still quite interesting and something that true Evangelion fans should experience even just for the novelty of it. Next, Neon Genesis Evangelion Shito Ikusei, also known as Angel Rising Project, is a game for the WonderSwan. It got an English translation in 2021. The term Raising Project is applied to a couple Ava games, though most of those are Princess Maker-likes. However, this is much more similar to a Tamagotchi, with like a small adventure-based RPG kind of strapped to the side of it. You play as Kaji, and you're given an angel to raise. Depending on how you manage the different LCL levels, it will result in different angels. You can find and unlock different items in the free-roaming adventure mode aspect of the game, as you explore Nerve and talk to the many people there. After you raise your first angel, you unlock the ability to fight the Avas with the angel, as well as the ability to leave Nerve and go to Tokyo 3. The game expects you to raise multiple angels, it doesn't end after just one. There are a couple things that you can do to find more elusive items that can change the angel into more specific ones, like the Avas, Kaoru, Rei, or even Pen Pen. The game is exceedingly charming with its little pixel art, all the detail packed into the environments, especially the angel raising screen. It's hard to really discuss it at length, due to it really just being a Tamagotchi with some very bare bones narrative structure. The adventure elements are interesting, but it's largely exploration, though the maze-like structure of the different areas and elevators is a little hard to get used to at first, but eventually you'll get familiar enough to know how long you can go before needing to return to the angel to supply it with energy, manage the LCL, and replace the filter. It's pretty unassuming, but considering the limitations of the console, it would be unreasonable to expect much more. I just really appreciate how bizarre it is. When it comes to anime adaptations of games, it's either RPGs that retell the story, usually during the GBA era, or fighting games that retell the story. I love this weird Tamagotchi adventure hybrid, especially with the framing that you play as Kaji. It took a long time before I even heard about Shinji, let alone seen him in the game. It's a very interesting choice, and one that I kind of want to celebrate. Now I want to move on to what felt like a standard title that ended up having some weird depth to it. Neon Genesis Evangelion Sound Impact, written out as a 3 with the ND for second. This is a pun in Japanese that I imagine does not really translate well, so people call it Sound Impact. It's a rhythm game for the PSP, with varying gameplay styles. Let me just quickly run through them for you. There is a fighting an angel as the UN, means copying the angel's moves to gain points in this almost battle simulation type screen, until you finally get to the end and shoot the angel with all of the different artillery and weaponry. Then there is this odd heartbeat-like wave-based gameplay, where the character's dialogue appears on each successful note in an oddly character-centric, introspective mode. There are Evangelion angel fights, where relevant footage from the first 2 Rebuild movie plays, pressing buttons to break down the angel's AT field in a very fast-paced levels. At the end, once the field is broken, you can mash the buttons to beat the core until it explodes into a bloody mess. Finally, there are the panel-based levels where you hit the note once it overlaps with this moving part, weakening the panels as you slowly unearth more and more of the video playing underneath. Overall, it's pretty engaging with a nice variety, but I think the most notable aspect is just how narrative-driven it is. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like you can play this game instead of watching the movies. You would have no idea what's going on. But the way the game goes through the angels in order, and especially the character-centric levels, which are essentially just musical monologues, there's odd depth to it. Rhythm games aren't too rare, especially in Japan, but I really can't find any other examples of anime being adapted into rhythm games when they aren't, like, musically focused. I think there are a lot of, like, idol anime with idol games, but it's always confusing which came first. But definitely not, like, a shonen mech series. It's pretty fascinating, interweaving the narrative elements into its various rhythm gameplay styles, taking you through the first 2 Rebuild movies. As for if you should play it, I would say so. It's in all Japanese, but it's really easy to play without knowing anything at all, like I did. Just have Google Translate on your phone by your side for the tutorials. However, I have left a little bit of a surprise until the end of this segment. I've not really touched upon the development history or the studios of any of the games I've discussed so far, That's largely because I don't find it particularly interesting. Except for this game, which was developed by literally Grasshopper Manufacture. If you're not familiar and are confused, this is the studio behind that of like No More Heroes, Killer 7, and all those kinds of things. Most famously, it houses director Suda51, who acted as a creative producer on this rhythm game. It's truly unreal that this is the case, and I'm so surprised that I've never heard that Grasshopper did an Evangelion rhythm game. Both things they're not exactly known for, so I would say it's worth checking out just for that novelty alone. Now, the last game I want to cover in this video is simply called Neon Genesis Evangelion. It was released for the Nintendo 64. It's a fighting game that loosely retells the series' plots while making enough alterations to fit the gameplay structure and platform limitations. There might be some more changes, but it was kind of hard to figure out. I really love the N64 aesthetics, especially after turning up the internal resolution, so playing this on an emulator is an absolute treat. The very compressed video mixed with the now clean polygons honestly is just a really interesting vibe and visual style, even if it wasn't originally intended. The game was only released in Japan and doesn't have any fan translation, which is why I was so unsure about the story elements earlier, but it's a very simple game, so it's pretty easy to play through it yourself, just with the caveat that you won't be able to pick up on the story changes and stuff like I didn't. However, I'm not really sure if I'd recommend it. I certainly enjoyed my time with it, but just know I literally couldn't get further than the second mission in the game. You could easily blame this on my poor skills, and you'd at least be partly right regardless. But most people who have played the game remark on the incredibly slow and grueling combat. I honestly don't even dislike the combat that much. I like how authentically clunky it is. I like the PS1 Armored Core games. I might just have something wrong with my brain, but that's how I feel. The main reason I couldn't go any further is just the difficulty. Before I get into it, keep in mind that due to the language barrier, I may have been misunderstanding some mechanics, and maybe you could find a very different experience than I did. I certainly had some difficulties with the controls playing it on a regular modern-day gamepad. It feels like you're not permitted any mistakes and must play like frame perfectly to beat even the first missions in the game. The enemies always deal considerably more damage than you, and with very quick attack startups that are really hard to predict, and I couldn't really find no clear patterns other than distance. You as the character are able to attack, throw, and use your AT field. However, I could never get the throw input to work, so that might be impairing my ability. I was abusing save states, and I still struggled, but for those who enjoy a potentially unfair challenge, I guess it could work. I think the charm bleeds through even this like poor fighting gameplay with heavy reliance on different animations and various triggers per fight. As I retried the first two missions over and over, I found each fight working out kind of differently. Some attempts included cutscenes I hadn't triggered before or after. I can't speak to the depth of this without really understanding what's going on, nor seeing how much it continues throughout the game, but it's really engaging. So that's what my experience was, but after doing some reading, it seems that about like half of the game plays like that, with the other half containing the additions of weapons and free-for-all segments. If you're curious about this title, I would suggest either playing it and doing your best, or you could just sit down and watch a playthrough it on YouTube. But I don't really want to join the collective disregard the internet has for this game. I believe it has some serious heart, incredibly charming graphics, and while many complain about how it reduces the show's story, it is insane that they managed to get any form of story mode in here at all. CD-ROMs were really the only way video could be done in games at that time due to the expanded storage, and the N64's failure is often attributed to its cartridges. So seeing how much they crammed into it is really aspirational. I think it's pretty endlessly charming despite my issues with its gameplay, and I honestly don't really care that I found the game borderline unplayable. I still had a great time with it, and I think the struggles were probably my fault as well as the game's. So I think the through line I was trying to establish should be pretty clear by now. Anime so often get video game adaptations, but they always feel so safe. and sometimes even keeping like the fan service to a marketable level rather than being these true love letters. But each and every Evangelion game is unique and bizarre in its own special way. It's got truly a weird legacy in the video game market, with most of it like fully dying after the PS2 era, making it just that much more interesting. There is an absolutely endless depth of interesting AVA games, most of which are completely foreign to the West due to lack of translations and coverage, just adding to that kind of air of mystery. These games feel ethereal, barely real to me, and I love exploring them, finding out what they are and how they work. So if you enjoyed this video and would ever like to see me go out and cover more of these games, just let me know. Maybe even have special requests that I could hear in the comments, but keep in mind, 90% of them are Japanese. I can only do so much. But I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching.